Shutdown scenarios. Well, there really aren't any. This one looks definite. The only question, duration. President Trump tells senior military leaders American cities could soon be training grounds. Former Trump National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster responds. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth calls for male standards for combat roles and for an end to overbearing rules of engagement. Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth calls the first a distraction, the second dangerous. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Nobody wants it, but everybody's going to get it. That's a government shutdown I'm talking about. There is zero sign at this hour Washington will swerve from the path it's been on basically for months to leave the government unfunded as of midnight tonight and force federal workers in essential tasks to work without pay and others to be furloughed with a very uncertain future and with a consequential elimination in services you may or may not notice. Now, economically, shutdowns like this are mildly disruptive, a tenth of a percentage point or two shaved from gross domestic product, depending on how long things last. For what it's worth, today the stock market shrugged in been there, done that boredom. As always, there is no shortage of sound and fury, this a rhetorical placeholder for work to end the impasse. So in order, sound-wise, President Trump, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and lastly, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Listen.
We'll probably have a shutdown because one of the things they want to do is they want to give incredible Medicare, the Cadillac Medicare, to illegal immigrants. And what that does is it keeps them coming into our country, and like they do in California.
Whether or not the government shuts down at midnight is entirely up to two people. It's Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, primarily Chuck Schumer. I want to tell you that I spent time with them yesterday. Of course, we were in the Oval Office. They are pursuing a very reckless strategy right now, and for the life of me, I cannot understand what they hope to accomplish other than giving themselves temporary political cover from the far left portion of their base, who are demanding that they fight Trump.
In the White House meeting yesterday, Speaker Johnson made it perfectly clear he didn't care if people's premiums should go up because his conference is against it. And so, again, the House isn't even set to come back until October 7th. You tell me which side is actively manufacturing a shutdown.
Democrats are here on duty, fighting on behalf of the American people, ready to fund the government in a way that lifts up their quality of life. House Democrats are on duty. House Republicans are on vacation.
One matter to clear up on health care for those in our country illegally. It is against the law to sign up and receive those direct Medicare or Medicaid benefits. But Republicans argue, and this is important, if changes to Medicaid that they made during discussion and then enactment of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill are removed, and that's something Democrats support, then federal dollars will flow to states that will allow those states, if they so choose, to use other funds to provide health care to undocumented residents in those states. It's about indirect support, not direct federal dollars, but it is a powerful talking point. And Republicans have used and will probably continue to use it with gusto. Now, there is a way out of all this, a bill that funds current operations for 7 weeks. The House passed it. The Senate, where Republicans need 60 votes and therefore help from at least 7 Democrats, didn't. Now, a vote on that bill is set to play out at this hour. It has failed once, as I just indicated, and is expected to fail again. We will keep you posted. The administrator of the Small Business Administration, Kelly Loeffler, joins me now. Madam Administrator, great to have you. I know you don't want to shut down, but if there is one, and we're getting very close to it, what will you not be able to do tomorrow that you do today?
Well, thank you, Major. Look, what we can't do tomorrow that we're doing today is what we're doing at record levels, which was providing access to capital for Main Street businesses, small businesses that make up 99% of all businesses across America, to the tune of something like $160 million each and every week going out the door to small businesses that will stop, to over 1,600 small businesses. So what does that mean? It means Main Street businesses won't get the funding that they thought they would get from their local lender to hire, to invest, to grow on Main Street. And that $860 million week after week adds up to billions of dollars. And the SBA has set a record this year in SBA lending to the tune of $45 billion across small businesses across this country. And that's the economic heartbeat of our country.
The director of the Office of Management and Budget has said if there is a shutdown, there would be an opportunity to lay off permanently non-productive members of various agencies or those who don't support the Trump agenda. Does that mean anyone who works for you?
Well, look, we have the ability to do that under statute, under our regulatory authority in areas that aren't funded past the shutdown, which is today. The Schumer shutdown doesn't have to happen. Democrats have had every reasonable opportunity to get on board with this bipartisan legislation in the House and in the Senate to keep the government functioning for our military, for our farmers, for our small businesses, for families, working families who rely on nutrition assistance. We have to make sure that this government stays open to serve the American people. This short stopgap funding bill will get us through to November when we can have the broader conversation. But look, Democrats hate the president's agenda because it's winning, and they're resentful. They want to shut the government down to make the American people pay a price, and we think it's wrong.
You said you have the power to do this. Would anyone in your agency be let go for good if there is a shutdown?
Look, we have a program in place. If this were to happen, we hope it doesn't happen. We run this agency very lean for the support of taxpayers and small businesses. But to the extent that those programs no longer have funding, we may have to do that. And we'll look at that and take steps as needed.
Madam Administrator, I want to read to you something that came from the Chamber of Commerce's third quarter 2025 Small Business Index. It said inflation remains a top concern for 46% of small businesses. Many are raising prices, 55% according to that survey, or adjusting supply chains, 36%, to offset what they described to the surveyors as higher costs. Is that a problem?
Look, small business optimism is at record highs, at least since 2017. We see it at the U.S. Chamber data. We see it in NFIB data, above the 53-year optimism average. Small businesses' number one concern right now is access to skilled labor. That's because President Trump has solved inflation. He's cutting regulation. The largest working family small business Main Street tax cut in American history. We're establishing fair trade. Small businesses want to make sure the government's functioning so that they can serve their customers on Main Street. And this Schumer shutdown will hurt small businesses. It will hurt working families, hardworking military members, and farmers. And we have to make sure that doesn't happen because President Trump has gotten this economy back on the right track.
You mentioned farmers a couple of times, Administrator Leffler. The president has indicated, at least rhetorically in the last week, that there may be the need for a farm bailout to offset some of the hardships imposed by tariffs. Those are his words, not mine. What do you know about that?
Well, look, I know that Secretary Rollins is working closely with President Trump. I know that fair trade is important to our farmers. I grew up on a farm. I know that rural America depends on fair trade. We haven't had that for a very long time. President Trump fought for it in his first term. He succeeded with it. He's going to do that again. And what I'm focused on is making sure that Main Street America is there for our rural communities, for our farmers, that the access to capital that they need is there. But the Schumer shutdowns threatens all of that. It threatens our farmers who rely on lending. It threatens small businesses who rely on it. And that's who President Trump supports, our small businesses, our farmers, and that's who Schumer is standing against.
Let me quantify the problem you raised a moment ago, Administrator Leffler, about job openings. In that Chamber of Commerce survey, 34% of small businesses said they had unfilled job openings. 47% said they could not find qualified applicants. How do you solve that?
Well, we're working on that at the SBA. We've partnered with the Department of Labor, with Secretary Chavez DeRaymer. We're traveling across the country, going to trade schools, meeting with small businesses, ensuring that we hear from them firsthand where they could use additional support. Department of Labor has incredible grant programs. The Small Business Administration is under our MOU working together to ensure that small businesses have the workforce of the future. And we know that there are over 1 million open jobs in this country, and we're working hard to fill those for Main Street businesses who are ready to grow thanks to President Trump's tax cuts.
SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler. Administrator Loeffler, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Major.
Because we like to move around here at the Takeout, I want to go to the conversation corner and welcome into it Washington Democratic Congresswoman and Chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Susan DelBene. Congresswoman, come around. You don't need to. Yeah, you navigated that beautifully. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming in.
It wasn't that hard.
You just heard the SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler say Democrats hate the Trump agenda and want to punish the American public with a shutdown as a result. Your reaction?
We want to support the American people, talk to people on the ground in communities across the country. Prices are going up across the country. They're slashing health care for millions of people across the country. People are angry. Trump promised to lower costs on day one in his administration, and yet through tariffs, the big ugly bill, costs have been going up. That's what you hear from people on the ground. We've got to make sure we're addressing the needs of our communities. And unfortunately, we've got a bunch of members of Congress on the Republican side who just are blindly loyal to Donald Trump.
How does shutting down the federal government solve any of the things you just described?
Now, what we need to do is make sure that we are supporting programs that help the American people. We're making sure that people have affordable quality health care across the country, and we're keeping the government open. Something very achievable to do. Turns out the fiscal year always starts on October 1st, and yet Republicans waited forever to try to work on funding bills. We shouldn't be doing continuing resolutions. We should have passed full-year funding bills by now. Republicans are in charge of the House, the Senate, the White House. Didn't come to the table, waited last minute, and now they're not even in town. We have a shutdown. The House Republicans aren't even here. And so we need people who are going to come to the table and work to make sure we're putting the needs of the American people first, not folks who are on vacation and, I guess, are hoping for a shutdown.
In the last hour or so, Senate Majority Leader John Thune has indicated that if there is a shutdown, there'll be no negotiations with Democrats.
Does he want to serve the American people? Turns out that the American people want Congress to work. I think we've had Republicans in Congress.
Doesn't that alarm you and frighten you about the potential duration of a shutdown?
It alarms me that Republicans have abdicated their responsibility in Congress, have just been blindly loyal to Donald Trump. We need folks who are going to stand up, put the voices of their communities first. Healthcare is critical across the country. People want to make sure that there's affordable quality healthcare. Republicans are ignoring that. And, you know, come to the table, sit down, count the votes. That's what it takes to pass legislation. That's always been true. They're uninterested in that. They're just trying to figure out kind of who they're going to blame and who they're going to hurt. In fact, if you listen to Russ Vought or the president,
Director of the Office of Management and Budget,
they've talked about the damage that they want to do, how they want to hurt the American people. They haven't talked about how we help folks. If there's a shutdown, they talk about the pain they want to inflict on the American people. We're fighting to help the American people, help families, and healthcare is obviously critical to that.
So some Democrats have said if there is an assurance from the White House that there will be good faith negotiations about Obamacare subsidies in the next 7 weeks, they might consider voting for a continuing resolution to keep the government open. Are you one of those?
I don't even know what that means. First of all, good faith. Have they been willing to negotiate on anything? They haven't been. They slashed health care for the American people in their big, ugly bill, slashed Medicaid, a $500 billion cut to Medicare as a result. And now we have the premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act for people who buy their health care on the exchanges across the country. Those expire at the end of the year, but notices are going out in October. Rates are going up right away. I know in my state, open enrollment starts November 1st. We need to deal with this now. In our state, if the tax credits aren't renewed, premiums go up by 65%. The estimate is that 80,000 people will no longer be able to afford health care as a result. That's what we're talking about. And that's not something that's happening tomorrow or 7 weeks from now. That's something that people are grappling with right now. And November 1st, they're going to be choosing insurance.
Congressman, you are convinced that this particular approach that has so far unified House and Senate Democrats will yield political benefits for you come next year?
This is about doing the right thing for the American people. If you go and you talk to people, talk to folks what they want to see the tax credits extended. They want to make sure there's affordable quality health care. They want to make sure their rural hospitals are going to stay open. We've already seen jobs cut at hospitals in our region as a result of the Republican policies that have been put in place. They want people who are standing up and fighting for the American people. This isn't just about blue districts. This impacts every district across the country, and Republicans are hearing it too. Republicans are hearing these stories, and yet they won't stand up.
Congresswoman, how does this end?
Well, we need folks to come to the table, and
you need Republicans to capitulate.
We need Republicans to even show up. House Republicans aren't even here. We just had a session in the House. They weren't even there. The government will shut down tonight. They should be here fighting for policy to support their communities, and they can't even show up.
Washington Democratic Congresswoman Susan Del Bene, head of the DCCC. Thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
And I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds.
In an address to top military brass, President Trump calls to shatter military norms in American cities. Defense Secretary Hegseth questions if women are qualified for the toughest combat roles. Former combat veteran Senator Tammy Duckworth and H.R. McMaster was a national security advisor in the first Trump administration. Join me to respond to what sounds like the beginnings, potentially, of a new Trump military doctrine. And government shutdowns historically have had limited impact on the U.S. economy. This one might be different and possibly more damaging. We'll explore that. If there's no agreement by midnight tonight, we'll look at the economic consequences to come. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have pledged to get rid of what they call woke military standards. Generals and admirals from around the world were summoned to Quantico, Virginia, for an unprecedented gathering. Now, not much strategy or future planning for global conflict was discussed. The president, however, said this about U.S. cities as, quote, military training grounds. Please listen.
I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military, because we're going into Chicago very soon. That's a big city with an incompetent governor, stupid governor. They need the military desperately. How about Portland, Oregon, where it looks like a war zone? And I get a call from the liberal governor, sir, please don't come in. We don't need you. I said, well, unless they're playing false tapes, this looked like World War II.
H.R. McMaster joins me now as National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration. He is also a CBS News foreign policy and national security contributor. H.R., I'm always glad to see you, but particularly on this day, because there's a lot to take a look at with what the president said and what the defense secretary said. First, on what you heard the president say about active duty U.S. military in American cities.
Yeah, hey, Major. I mean, there's a role for the military in support of law enforcement, but that's the critical phrase, in support of law enforcement, not to take actions against U.S. citizens who deserve and have the right to due process of law. And that's what our law enforcement gives us, and it's not the role for the military. There are roles for the military. I mean, he mentioned Portland. Remember how Portland was kind of besieged in terms of the federal buildings, and that whole neighborhood, was taken over by anarchists.
Back in 2020,
can be used in support. Back in 2020, can be used in support of law enforcement to protect U.S. citizens and to free up law enforcement for for what they do, which is to investigate crimes, make arrests, and so forth. So, hey, there is an appropriate role. It's like with so many things with President Trump, what he wants to achieve, save cities. Hey, that's a good thing. And maybe the military has a role with that. You're seeing actually that the D.C. National Guard is doing a very professional job in Washington, and they're in total coordination and support, with the mayor, the deputy mayors, with law enforcement. That's working out. But the way the president frames it, he begins to compromise kind of our covenant between the military and our citizens, and that's what concerns me.
And when he uses a phrase like enemy from within, does that also concern you?
It does, kind of the way he's using it, right? I mean, I think that, we swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And But what that doesn't mean is that, that doesn't adhere to a broad definition of maybe people who are politically opposed, to the president. So, and because he uses that term quite freely. And so this is where I think this undermines potentially, confidence in our institutions. And what we don't want to do, Major, is drag the military into this vitriolic partisan discourse. I mean, hey, it isn't working out for other institutions and other, look at university campuses. I mean, we can't have that kind of a situation in the military, and we shouldn't. Our military has a very strong professional military ethic. From our founding, Major, we've been committed to really a bold line, between partisan politics and our military institutions.
HR, I want to play for you sound from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth about women, combat, and physical requirements. Let's play that.
Our female officers and NCOs are the absolute best in the world. But when it comes to any job that requires physical power to perform in combat, those physical standards must be high and gender neutral. If women can make it, excellent. If not, it is what it is. If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it.
Your reaction?
Hey, I think he's right about that. Now, what I really want to make sure is that there's nobody out there who misunderstands that if women don't qualify, for certain positions for like close combat and infantry or armor, because it's difficult with the differences, physiological differences in upper body strength to drag a casualty 90 feet or to evacuate an armored vehicle crewman out of a vehicle and so forth. Hey, those should be gender neutral standards, and either you make it or you don't make it, Major. But, one of the things we have to make sure is that, hey, our women are warriors. We have to recognize that they demonstrate tremendous courage, tremendous commitment to one another and to the mission, and they're willing to sacrifice for our nation. Who is more courageous, Major? An infantry combat soldier in an infantry squad in close combat, or a female fuel Hemet driver sitting in front of 2,500 gallons of JP8 fuel on a contested highway in Baghdad. Right? So I just hope that very, I think, accurate, appropriate statement that he made doesn't get misinterpreted.
I want to play also sound from the Defense Secretary about rules of engagement going forward. Please listen.
We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters.
Any problem with that, HR?
No problem with that. What I would have loved to have heard, Major, is a caveat to that in terms of consistent with the laws of land warfare and our professional military ethic and our warrior ethos, which you talked about. Our warrior ethos is to overmatch the enemy in combat. Don't give the enemy, a fighting chance. When in doubt, bump up, in terms of your ability to overmatch the enemy. But this is really important, Major. Apply firepower with discipline and especially discrimination. Consistent, not only with the laws of land warfare, but with what St. Thomas Aquinas taught us about in jus in bello theory, right? So distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants. And that's part of our professional military ethic. It's what distinguishes our military from other militaries. I don't think he was implying that we should stop, doing that to hold ourselves to that high standard. But I would have loved to hear him, just add that qualification, that qualifier, or that caveat.
H.R. McMaster, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Major, great to be with you.
Combat veteran and Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth on Hegseth's comments on women in the military, President Trump's plans for National Guard troops in Illinois, and a possible government shutdown, which we've been talking about. She joins me next right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. Great to have you with us. Earlier, I spoke with Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth. Here is our conversation. Senator Duckworth, I know you probably had a chance to look at the president's speech and the defense secretary's speech at Quantico today with this very unusual gathering of flag officers from around the world. In it, the president said that the military should go to dangerous cities as a training ground, and then very shortly thereafter name-checked Chicago. Your reaction?
With the highest crime rates are not places like Chicago. They're actually in red states. So maybe he should send them to those cities in those particular states.
What about the idea that he also said that the U.S. military, not the National Guard, which can be deployed under certain circumstances, but the U.S. military, active duty, should be prepared to fight an enemy within?
The president who wants to become a dictator, right? This is the playbook of authoritarianism, and it's actually unconstitutional. You cannot deploy our military onto the streets of our cities to basically harass and target Americans. He uses terms like the enemy within because of posse comitatus, because of the Insurrection Act. He's trying to change the language and claim that there is an invasion of the United States, that there is an enemy within. There is not. It's very clear. It's why he's lost the court case in California. When he sent troops in California, it was found to be illegal. But he's going to continue to do this because he wants to normalize having uniformed personnel on the streets of our cities so he can intimidate Americans, because he wants to steal the next election. He wants them to be there come November of next year, and we simply cannot let that happen.
What's happening in Chicago? What do you fear may happen in the coming days?
Well, I think that he is going to send troops into Chicago, but they're going to be welcomed with respect. We in Chicago are going to show that we can peacefully demonstrate, and that we also understand that the military men and women of this great nation don't choose where they are sent. And so we're going to treat them with respect. At the same time, we're going to make it clear that we do not welcome the occupation of our cities. We do not welcome the strong-arm tactics of a wannabe tin pot dictator like Donald Trump.
And when he said, as he did later at the White House today, the Democratic governor should be begging him to send National Guard forces to their, in his words, crime-riddled cities, what do you say?
I would say that if he's going to go ahead and activate National Guard troops from red states like Texas, then maybe he should send them into Texas cities that have the higher crime rates than Chicago.
The Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, said going forward, for all combat roles, a male standard will apply, and if no women qualify, quote, so be it. Your reaction?
Yeah, there already are standards for combat roles that are based on the combat job. What it takes to be a helicopter pilot is very different than what it takes, for example, to be a heavy equipment mechanic, where you have to, replace a giant piece of equipment. But bottom line, those standards already exist. The people in those jobs already qualified for those positions, unlike Mr. Hegseth, who is the least qualified Secretary of Defense in our nation's history. And what's really interesting is he failed to mention age. The military has physical fitness standards that are graduated based on age. So what is the standard for an 18-year-old man is not the standard for a 45-year-old man. He didn't mention that. So he is opening a whole can of worms and messing things up when there already are established standards, and we already have people in jobs, in combat roles, who are already qualified and well-trained by taxpayer dollars to do their jobs. He needs to get out of the way and let people do their jobs.
One last thing on what Hegseth said at this meeting. He said there will be no more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Does that in any way alarm you?
It very much alarms me, because this, again, has started in many ways, but part of this also happened with the shooting of the boats out of Venezuela, the purported smugglers. But basically, if you take away the rules of engagement, then you get to a place where the troops can be actually put into jeopardy if there are no rules of engagement for them to follow. It also makes other nations realize, and our adversaries realize, that they can then engage American troops in any way that they want to, and that actually puts our troops in greater danger.
The Majority Leader, John Thune, said today that Republicans are prepared to negotiate with Democrats in the Senate on future health care issues, but not unless a 7-week continuing resolution is approved. He said Democrats must release the hostage, his phrase. Why not release the hostage?
holding the American people hostage. If we don't make a decision soon, people's Affordable Care Act premiums, your health care, whether or not you get your health care on the exchange, are going to more than double. That is from the Kaiser Family Foundation data. And so we don't have another 7 weeks. We don't have another 7 months. We don't have another 7 days, because what's happening is insurance companies have to decide their rates for next year right now. And people are going to start within the next 2 weeks getting letters from their insurance companies telling them, if you're getting your health care on the exchange, you're going to see your rates more than double. And that's also going to be for those who have private health insurance as well. Those rates will also increase as well. And so there is no hostage. The only hostage there is are the American people who are going to see their health insurance rates go up. And the people holding them hostage are the Republicans. It's John Thune. Come talk to us. We can have a negotiation. But he's refusing to negotiate with Democrats. And so he's going to do exactly what Donald Trump wants, which is they're going to shut down government so that they can get away with basically raising insurance rates and the healthcare costs on Americans all across this great nation. And I'm simply not going to be willing to allow them to do that.
Senator Tammy Duckworth, Illinois Democrat. Thank you. Even if there isn't a federal government shutdown, and it certainly looks like there will be, hundreds of FBI employees will be waking up tomorrow without a job. What we're learning about the big changes at the FBI, that's next right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Something approximating a purge is going on at the FBI as we speak. Sources tell CBS News that tonight, 800 employees, including a few hundred FBI agents, will be leaving the Bureau. Now, the majority agreed to a DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency buyout. That goes into effect tonight. But hundreds of others were recently fired. For all the details, we turn, as always, on such matters, CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland. What's going on?
Lots of different buckets for people to be departing. Let's get them all separated. First of all, at midnight, that DOGE fork in the road comes due. And some of the people who took that fork in the road were working up to near this deadline, if not to this deadline. That'll include about 800 FBI employees. Roughly a third of them are FBI agents. They'll be off the street. In the broader sense, at the Department of Justice, there have been hundreds who've been removed as part of this purge, either leveraged to resign or flat out fired for their connection to criminal investigations of President Trump, investigations of January 6th, or all those other sensitive cases that have popped up, from James Comey to cases in California. But you combine all this, and you got a lot of manpower that's gone. But here's what we know from our latest reporting. When the shutdown takes effect, it shouldn't be aggravating those numbers. About 36,700 FBI employees, roughly. Zero will be impacted by the shutdown, but there's going to be damage done at midnight, no matter if this shutdown or not.
And what about the operational scope and tempo of the FBI with these either early retirements or scheduled retirements or dismissals?
You're losing institutional memory no matter what. I think supporters of the president would argue that's for better. I think critics would say that's for worse. But nevertheless, you're losing experience in the world of the FBI. It's no small fee to pay. But there's also the matter of where the remaining employees are going to be. The FBI has been unequivocal, Major. They want to move people out of Washington into field offices. They want them in Milwaukee and Memphis, and they want them in the Northeast and Southwest, not here in Washington. That's all on hold, though, as long as there's a shutdown.
Scott McFarland, it's always great to have you with us, especially when you don't bring a coat and look like a true working reporter, which I know you are. Well, first it was ESPN's Stephen A. Smith, very famous guy. He said he was considering maybe running for president. Now, his colleague, the nearly as famous, for those of us who follow SEC sports, Paul Feinbaum, says he's weighing a jump into politics, where he's considering running for Senate. Believe it or not, next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to Takeout. Before we get to our distinguished political panel, to answer your question, I know you're all thinking about it. Yes, I've been distracted, okay? The wild card game is going on while we're doing this show, and the Padres lost 3-1 in Game 1, but it's just a strategy to lull the Cubs into a false sense of security. All right, back to the regular program. Barring a breakthrough, which we have pretty much let you know there isn't very many signs of, the federal government will shut down just after midnight tonight. To discuss this and pull it apart politically and otherwise, our political panel. Former Director for DNC Chair Jamie Harrison, Jaime Moore, and Republican political strategist, and significantly, CBS News contributor Terry Sullivan. Great to have you here.
Good to see you.
Yes, I'm in mourning. I'm kind of dealing with that. So let's
that strategy didn't work for the Nats too well.
No,
so, yeah,
no. Look, it's the best I've got.
Yeah.
Look, in difficult circumstances, you come up with the best strategy you can. And I'm just saying we're lulling the Cubs into a false.
We're rebuilding.
Like
the coffee mug,
exactly.
though. You're doing well.
There we go.
You're doing your
very
part.
Good. Very retro. Very retro. All right, Terry, go first on the shutdown. What do Republicans gain from a shutdown, if anything?
It's not about what they gain. I mean, look, nobody gains anything from a shutdown ever.
Yet they keep happening.
Right, they keep happening. Look, Democrats need to check the box to feed their base. They need, a little blood on their hands to show they're fighting really hard, sticking it to Donald Trump. But look, at the end of the day, they're going to cave. Republicans are not going to meet them in the middle. They're just going to walk away. Trump has no incentive to do anything other than just hold the line.
And so Democrats have to decide at what 5 or 10% do they extract that looks like a victory but probably isn't.
Right. It's just 2013 all over again, only the shoe's on the other foot.
Jaime?
Yeah, I don't disagree with what my co-panelists just said. But look, I was just talking to some of the Jeffries people. And
Hakeem Jeffries, minority leader in the House.
And I think the leader would like people to know that, to your point, he is fighting. And I think what they've said over the last 9 months on the Democratic side is Donald Trump has not lowered costs. And I think what they've decided is not lowering health care costs is going to be their cross to bear for the next couple of months. And so, look,
and their way to enter the political year of 2026.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on. And there's a lot happening in New York. There's a lot happening, in New Jersey and Virginia with that governor's race. So I think Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House, is trying to insert himself into the national conversation a little bit more. And I think more importantly, what he's trying to do is give his members something to run on, because we're in this mini primary season right now. And then I think he wants his voters to know that, look, we are fighting for you. We do care about health care. We are pissed off about the big, beautiful bill. And we are trying to find some concessions.
So while we're talking, if the control room can call up the United States Senate floor, you'll see voting on the Democratic alternative. That's expected to fail. Then the Republican alternative, that's expected to fail. We're just sort of going through the motions here. On this program last night, Mike Lawler, Republican congressman from New York, said Schumer is fighting because he's afraid of his left flank and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Do you agree with that, and walk my audience through what that looks like?
Well, you and I have talked about this a bunch of times over the past few months. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Senate, is going to have to run for re-election himself next year in New York. What we've heard over the last couple of months is the representative, AOC, as they call her, she is considering running for the Senate. And so what she's telegraphed all over New York and all over the country is if Chuck Schumer does not behave in the way that the party would like him to behave, he ought to be primaried. Now, there's a whole flank of people who don't agree with that. There's a whole flank of people. Chuck Schumer has been the leader for a very long time, coming under Harry Reid. And so he does have a lot of institutional support. However, what we've seen over the past year, and having Donald Trump re-enter this sort of arena, everything's different now, particularly with the mayor's race in New York. I think that's put some pressure on him. AOC was one of the very first supporters of Mandani, and so she's using that as some distinction for Chuck Schumer. And look, think about what happened last year the year before last with the college student loans. Chuck Schumer had never been pro-erasing loans, and he's emerged to be one of the top proponents of that. And so you're going to see Chuck Schumer over the next couple of months, particularly around this shutdown, you're going to see him try to emerge as a fighter and a leader.
Terry, I want to talk to you about something that's happening in the broader world of Senate politics. Paul Feinbaum, for those of us who follow SEC sports, I count myself among them, know him very well. He said
Are there other conferences?
Yeah, on the other conferences. Good question. It matters more in the SEC. Just don't ever forget that. On Outkick, a program on ESPN, he talked about possibly running for the Alabama Senate. Listen.
If the president of the United States says, Paul, you're my guy, can you tell him no?
Impossible to tell him no. There's no way I could. I would say yes.
Stephen A. Smith, look out. Paul Feinbaum might run for the Senate.
Yeah, wow.
Would that be fun to see him in the Senate? Hanging out with all the floor?
It might be. It might be, but he's not the most dynamic individual, I don't know.
But it's this interesting crossover of sports and celebrity and politics.
100%. Well, that's what I was going to say is, look, that matters now more than ever before. We're seeing more and more celebrity politicians.
Visibility that you already have.
You pre-baked in name ID, and that's expensive to buy. And even in a state like Alabama, and he's got a lot of name ID there. Now, some of it's not good the way he's crapping on Alabama right now in the team, but I still think like he's going to be a formidable candidate if he decides to run.
And this idea, Jaime, that if you have your own identity, then you can transfer that to politics. Quite separate from whether you have any political skills or not, you have a visibility.
You do, and it doesn't always work. And I think President Donald Trump is the clear example of that. I mean, you know, everyone knows Donald Trump, even before he ran for president. And I think you're going to see that. Stephen A. Smith and these individuals, even on the Democratic side, Mark Cuban, these individuals, and some people would say everyone has a taste for power and a taste for politics, and so I'm not surprised by it. But to your point, they do have a built-in name ID, and for some people, they ought to think about it.
It worked well for Trump. It did not work so well for Herschel Walker.
No, it did not.
There are limitations. There are very much limitations. Terry Sullivan, Jaime Moore, always a pleasure. Remember, the candy doesn't eat itself. Grab all you want. Government shutdowns. Well, they're politically paralyzing and sort of a testament to how Washington does or doesn't work. This time, there's some interesting economic components and possible shockwaves that might reverberate through the economy. Our Kelly O'Grady standing by with the latest analysis. That's next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Wall Street's keeping a somewhat watchful eye on Washington as this government shutdown approaches. And here's why. New analysis from Ernst & Young Parthenon finds a protracted shutdown could cost the U.S. economy about $7 billion per week. Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins me now. Kelly, I don't want to confuse people. We have a $30.5 trillion U.S. economy. So if you took $7 billion a week and multiplied that by every week of the year, you get $364 billion. That's not going to crater the economy, but there's a multiplier effect in there. And more importantly, there's data that comes from the federal government that might be slowed or absent entirely. And I think that's what Wall Street's paying attention to.
That's right. I mean, look, Major, the market's closed up today. And of course, we don't have the government shutdown. There could still be an 11th hour deal, right? And we'll sort of see how the markets react tomorrow. But I will note that normally, even when you see some oscillations in the market when a government shutdown happens, it goes away pretty quickly. We're not dealing with a debt ceiling and the question of whether the government is going to default. That's really where you more see investors have a visceral reaction. But I'm glad you brought up this economic data piece, because we have a jobs report coming out on Friday. I am ready to go report on it for you. But if the government shuts down, that's going to be delayed. Now, that's important because it's a key piece of information that the Federal Reserve is going to use at the end of October when it meets next to decide whether it's going to cut interest rates. And I've spoken to a number of analysts, and they said, well, you know what, if the Fed doesn't have that data, and if it doesn't have the inflation report that comes out next or in a week or so, they might just say, hey, we're going to be a little cautious. We're not going to do anything with rates, or they might even delay that meeting. And so you talk about that cascading effect, that can impact you at home when it comes to small business loans, mortgage rates. So that's really more the thing that investors, I agree with you, are looking at here.
And Kelly, we've talked about this before, but investors talk about and business leaders talk about the uncertainty tax, meaning things are uncertain, and that makes people hesitant in terms of investing, planning for future initiatives. This would fall into that.
It definitely would. You have a lot of uncertainty, the labor market, interest rates, tariffs, a government shutdown, and how long that's going to last. Remember, under President Trump's first term, it lasted over a month. That does add to the element of, are you going to hire? Are you going to fire? Are you going to invest more in that? Now, we're talking mostly about, federal government, but that does cascade down, because if a federal worker isn't getting paid, even if they're going to get back pay, they're probably going to scrunch the purse strings a little bit in the meantime. So those things do trickle down to the economy.
Federal workers, and importantly, don't forget about these federal contractors. They outnumber the federal workforce, and they will probably not get paid either. Kelly O'Grady, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, and occasionally clever. That's true. The Daily Report starts right now.